Hello. Some of you may know me as lSherlockl from the airsoft subreddit. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my technique for making the Rhop patch. Um, I will say that this is a more advanced method than some of the other installs, but the whole goal of my take on it is to have a very consistent and replicable installation. What that means is I want to achieve the ultimate consistency in the cutting of the patch. With my method, I intend to make it or refine it to the point where I can cut a dozen patches that are perfectly identical. Well, within reason. Anyhow, to start off with, some of the tools that you will be needing. Silicone oil. We have our barrel, our hopup material, which is our hop material, silicone tube. I have this 6mm plastic tubing that we'll be using as a guide later, but you could also probably use a wood dowel, metal rod, probably a whole variety of material, so long as it fits nicely inside your barrel. But more on that later. We also have a slightly larger than 6mm piece of rod. Again, you could probably use other materials here. We have Dremel, varying small grit emery bits, block of wood that will form a jig for cutting it, a fresh razor blade. It's important to have a fresh, clean one because it will cut through your tubing like butter and give you a nice, clean, even cut on the first attempt. Of course, caliper. Also later, we'll be using RTV silicone gasket maker to adhere it to the barrel. Good to have on hand some fine grits of sandpaper. And then you will probably also need a drill, lathe, drill press, or anything really used to turn it at a relatively high speed. I'm not sure if I mentioned, but you also need a Dremel. Okay, to begin, let's start with making the patch, or the first step of making the patch, in which we will take a chunk of our silicone tube. So here we have my barrel. I have already gone ahead and cleaned up the window on it. It was slightly rounded on the corners. You want to make sure that has a nice flat edge on the front, a nice flat edge on the back. And then I polished it up a bit with some micro files. Arguably this step may not be needed, depends on how your barrel looks. My ZCI barrel here that I did earlier did not need any of that. Okay, so how much silicone tube do you need to start out with? I just start out by eyeballing, so I have a little over twice the length of the window. So I'm going to take my razor blade, eyeball that, keeping it as square as you can, apply gentle even pressure down, and you will have a very nice clean square cut. So this is what we'll be using. Now here is where my method, I feel, differs a lot from a lot of other people's takes on it. Most people from here would go take your blade and you'd cut your slice down. Then cut it to length and sand it to fit your window. To me, this idea seems rather silly, being that if we take a close look, if my camera would focus here, at our diameters here, we will note that the outside diameter of the silicone tube is 894. The outside diameter of our barrel is 847 or 845. Likewise, the inner diameters are also going to differ between our tube and a barrel. So my approach has been to match the outer and inner diameter of your silicone tube to the outer and inner diameter of your barrel before you cut the patch. That way, when you affix your patch, it will be a perfect fit. No pulling it back off, no sanding, no fiddling necessary. So far, my tests on this have been good. We've shown excellent results, but I will leave it up to you whether you want to attempt or try this method or not. So, to start with, how do we reduce the size of the interior? Or expand the size of the interior, rather. Because here, you want to be careful not to apply too much pressure because it's silicone, and it will easily move. So we compare to our barrel, and what we want to do is gradually remove material until they equal each other. So to do this, what I'm going to use is this is a coarse emery bit on the Dremel. It uses the small shank and chuck, and you'll notice that it happens to fit nicely inside of our tube. As with any sanding, when you're working with your R-Hop, you'll be wanting to use a small amount of silicone oil, which aids in getting a nice clean cut and removing or letting the debris flow out. So just putting a bit on there, use your finger, wipe it around. Probably also a good idea to have some paper towel handy. And to remove the interior material, I'm going to take this sheet of glass. Also very great for sanding, polishing slides. I may do a tutorial on that later, but basically it's a perfectly flat surface. So what I'm going to do, if I can get it on camera here, is bring it to the edge of my table. I'm going to set this here, turn on my Dremel, and we're going to roll along the table our piece of silicone so that we can evenly get all of the interior. And I'll go back and edit out the whole process of doing that. But basically, you slowly remove material. You have to keep on checking it with your caliper. And then we switch to a finer grit bit. And we do the same thing to finish up polishing the interior. Once it's down to size, we can go ahead and do the exterior. One thing to note is a lot of you may cringe at the thought of sanding the interior, which is essentially what you're doing with these emery bits. However, I would like to assure you, or propose this theorem, is the fact that the surface of our silicone here it's very smooth and even. While you want it even, you don't necessarily want it smooth. The micro cuts left by our emery bit will provide horizontal grooves, which will allow better grip on the BB as you apply hop. So long as those grooves are cut consistently, it's a really good thing. And using a rotary tool, I found that they certainly seem to be very consistent. I haven't gone through and looked at any of it under a microscope, but in my experience, it works just fine. So I will cut the film and then come back when we do the outside. Okay, so now we were able to match our inside diameter of our tube to the inside diameter of our silicone tube. So now we need to match the outside diameter to the outside diameter. And to do this, I would definitely recommend using lathe, drill press, pretty much any other methodology, but for the purposes of making it more easier for you guys to do, we are going to chuck this piece of rod that our tube fits tightly over, just slightly bigger than the inside diameter of most barrels. So this is sitting in here tight. and chuck it in a drill. And then we're going to start out with using a sanding disc, fixed or Dremel. And if you note on the back side here, I put the sanding disc on top of a cutoff wheel to give it added stability. Once again, we will be wanting to use some silicone oil on our sanding disc, which provides cleaner cuts against our silicone. You notice to start with, I've left the end hanging off the drill just a bit. This is going to be our initial end. Actually, I think that's not the one that I cut. This is this edge that I'd cut. Push it on like so. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our Dremel like this over the middle, and we're going to square it up and ensure a nice smooth edge across one side. It's really all you need, because when we slide it on the jig, you want a square surface so that each of your cuts is going to be consistent. So you rotate your drill and your Dremel. Once again, much better to do it on a lathe or a drill press with like the extension for this mounted in like a milling vise, so you can gradually bring it in as you need to give you much more consistency. But like I said, today we're going to show you the more achievable method by most people. So we're just taking the end here and lightly sanding it until you see here we got it nice and square. On the bottom, just to remove any inconsistencies from that first cut that I made. Now we slide it the rest of the way onto our shank here. And we are going to start working on the horizontal. Now it's important when you're dremeling along the horizontal that you move from one side to the other and back. Why this is, instead of just sitting there in the middle, is because the outside of your disc spins faster than the inside. So right here, you would end up with a bowed shape because the outside edges of the disc would remove material on either end faster than in the middle. So just for example, you always want to check your sandpaper too and make sure that you have adequate, or that it's always kind of damp. Like that. Just helps remove material better and more evenly. So I'm rotating my material here, and then you work back and forth and back and forth. Now we aren't definitely to size yet, and you can tell when we pull this off here and look at it, whoop, that it is now sort of smoky in appearance as compared to the clear tube. The other thing to note is you're going to be wanting to take measurements as you go, because you sequentially remove material to match the outside of your barrel. However, you do not want to measure it while it is on this chuck, because this is slightly bigger than the inside of the barrel, which means in order for it to grip our hot material here, it is applying outward pressure. So whenever you take your measurements, you want to remove it, then carefully take your measurement so you aren't squishing the tube, and then compare that to the outside of the barrel until they match. Once you complete roughing it down with our sandpaper, then you switch out to this nice emery polishing disc, which will give you a much smoother finish. Once again, for people that prefer to keep the smooth, clean exterior, especially on the outside, there isn't a whole lot more difference, but the biggest thing is it doesn't really matter so long as it's consistent and even. And once again, we're using a tool and a setup so that you get a consistent and even finish. You'll also want to check when you're measuring your diameter and make sure that along it, you're all the same size. So I will finish up the exterior and then come back to you. Okay, so I have finished the exterior here so that, well, turn it around, it matches our barrel perfectly, and the interior matches as well. We're able to, actually there's a bit of dirt in there, but you're able to pass a BB through it with ease as compared to our stock tube where you can like barely jam it in there. Just another good easy test for you to do. So we have this. So now how are we going to use our copy of our barrel here to get sort of like the cross section of the cylinder that we need to make our rHop patch. For that, I have devised a very simple jig. I have a block of wood with a hole drilled in it that will fit our plastic rod, which fits inside of our barrel. So now what we need to do, if you noticed on this one, the edge has a flat face cut on it. That flat face is cut to match the depth of your barrel window. However, the one that I currently have in our jig is for ZCI barrels, because that's what it's sized to, and it doesn't quite perfectly fit. This stock barrel, it's for M249 by A&K. So, it sticks up just a bit too much. So what we are going to do, so I've already cut another section of this tube. Want to make sure that it's straight, and then we insert it into our barrel. And what you're going to use, I'm going to not use my super sharp razor here, but just a cutter or any good knife, and I'm going to make cuts until it bottoms out in our hopup window into the tube. This will tell us the depth that we need. So then what we do is we take our razor or sandpaper or whatever method you really want to do, and we're going to slice down to that depth along the edge so we have sort of the negative to the hopup window. And I'll do that and come back. Okay, so we're back. I have created my cross profile here, and hard to see there, so that it matches the depth of the window. This will serve to allow us to make a perfect cut on our rHop material here, so that it will match our window to a T. This is a result of seeing several different suggestions on how to help cut your make that long vertical cut. Some of which were like, oh, you put it on a screwdriver that's about the right size and you slide it down. The issue with that is your sort of legs, if you will, of the rHop, they won't sit perfectly level how they're supposed to on here, and they require more fiddling and sanding and taking apart and fiddling and sanding. And we want this to work on the first go. So then what we do is we take our jig here and we're going to fit it into our hole that's drilled at a right angle. Sits in there kind of stiff. We have it here. Make sure that your hose is straight. In this case, it's a hose. And what we are going to do too is, so remember how we squared up one end of our tube? That end goes down. So this is going to slide on here just like this, which is perfect. However, there's one more thing that I've noticed helps. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some super glue. Basically, what we want to do is we want to apply the thin bit of super glue. Well, it's kind of probably hard to see, just on the edge before the flat bit. Now what this does is it holds your silicone tube tight, but yet the super glue is very easy to flake off. So it'll allow us to hold it perfectly steady so it doesn't pull or peel away. Discovered this trick after trying to make a couple of cuts on my first attempt. So it works really well. So we're going to put on stuff that I have technically says it's a gel, but it shouldn't really matter what you use. You really don't want to put a heck of a whole lot on. So got a tiny bit here. We're going to drag it along that edge and drag it along this edge. Now, in general, being that our tube is made out of this, I have no clue, like an ABS, maybe? The plastic that it's made out of, it comes off relatively easy. You can just flake it off with an X-Acto knife. And we are going to set this down here. So now it will be glued into position so that nothing will pull out. You also want to make sure that your jig sticks out far enough that you have a bit of plastic to brace it on once we start cutting. So, judging by how the bit has hardened on my fingers, I assume that we are pretty much good to go. So, I'll try and cut it on camera, but... So once again, you always want to use a very sharp razor. And I'm just holding both to apply pressure against that nice flat surface we created. And then we're going to make an even stroke down, continuously applying pressure against that nice flat surface. And boom, on the side of it sticking to the wood a bit, we have a nice, perfect, even width cut. And you can see on the interior a bit, it's pretty nice and even. So now the other nice thing about this is because we super glued it on, you can see it just pops right off. It's pretty darn easy. And the bit of residue that is left on the pipe here just kind of flakes right off. And the bit of residue from the super glue that's on the bucking does the same, because it's silicone. All it does is really help give it stability temporarily wise. And now we can reapply some super glue, rotate our tube here, glue it down again. Super glue also really helps for making this, so we can get 3 perfectly even slices that are all going to be the same size and all will fit your window perfectly. But instead of showing you that, let's go ahead and cut a section of this to the length of our window. So to do this, I'm just going to use my calipers here and get the width using the back end. And then use this to measure out our length. Hopefully I get the top of my head in the shot here, but so you take this, actually be able to get like 3 or 4 as long as I made this. And just eyeballing it to make sure it's square. apply nice even downward pressure. Makes it so sharp. We have a nice, perfect little patch that we can, well, okay. This one I arguably cut maybe a bit too short. But from here, you can tell we have a pretty much perfect fit. And holding it here, I don't have a flat top bucking yet for this guy, which I'll probably also make a video of. Is the rest of the process. That'll be like part 2. Whoop. Is that it does not protrude into our window when it's just sitting there. Now, to continue this, you aren't quite done once you have your patch cut the size. I will go back and I'll cut the proper length patch for this, because let's see if I can get you to focus again. This is a bit too much of a gap. You want a tiny amount of gap on the front and the back, but this is a bit too much. Like I can fit the sanding disc here in between one of the edges. So that's too much, but anyhow, what you then also finally need to do before we glue it down is we need to bevel the front edge and the back edge of our hub patch. So we're going to use, these guys really work the best, I find. Also 2 grades of emery bits, and we are just going to lightly bevel the front and the back edges, trying to do so as evenly as possible. And then once I get the patch cut and that done, I will come back and show you how to glue it down, and then the rest of the hop-up assembly, or I'll probably make a series on how to finish it up and then making nubs and all that stuff. But the important part, our hop patch will be complete. Okay, so I have my 2 patches cut here. Whenever I do an install for someone, I always cut a spare patch. In the event of somehow they manage to damage, destroy, or do anything to the one, you gotta back up. Here too you can see I cut up the rest of that bucking, and I had, well, not bucking, that blank that I had machined down, so to speak. And I cut 2 smaller ones. So I was hurrying for the sake of the video. But also to note, if you look carefully between these 2, you can see the results of not using the super glue. This one here, I didn't let the super glue cure enough, so it wasn't firmly affixed. And you notice here up on the top, it's narrower, and that's because it pulled away. So let that be an example that you need to glue it to get a very consistent one. But you see, starting here, perfect match. And our nice 2 little guys, I might have another barrel that these will fit on, and I have some blanks for if I ever run into a barrel that has the window this size. So let's move on to mounting. So what I like to use is RTV silicone, and I believe this is the guy that's going to mount. Got a much better fit this time around, so that's good. And we have our edges beveled, so that's checked off the list. These work nicely. No protrusions on the inside. So moving on, let us adhere it down. For that, we need our RTV silicone, a pin, which I like to use to apply it, and we're going to need a piece of tape to adhere it to the barrel, or to hold it in barrel while it dries. RTV silicone takes 24 hours to set fully. So what I like to do, actually I'm just going to do this. I'll do it this way. I'm going to squirt a small amount out. Actually, that's probably more than enough. I'll just take out my pin, transfer it down. So now we have a little puddle of it, for which we can take the material from to apply to our window. Making sure that there's just a bit sticking out here, so when we seal it back up, it's not going to dry out on us. Okay, so I'll try and do this close to the camera, but we want to get just a tiny bit up on the tip. And what we are going to do is very carefully apply a very thin bead along the outside edge of the window. So once we put on our bucking, well, our hot patch, it's going to squish it down and it's going to move towards the inside. Realistically, just wipe a bit of excess off the outside there. Oh, come on, focus. And then we do the same on the other side. It's a bit hard to do because I'm kind of floating in air here. There's nothing to rest the barrel on. But just so you guys can see. And we want to keep it even. This side I think could use just a touch more on it. So that's it. Some of my hands. And then, nice thing is it takes a good while to set. So we have plenty of time to make sure we get it right the first time. Okay. So, we have that there. And then we're just going to carefully, from the top side, take, more or less, kind of just drop him down. Now, we do not want any of the silicone entering the inside. So that's what you got to watch for. So then we'll take my piece of tape, cut before, place it over dead center, middle. So you want it to apply pressure from the top and out. And it looks like we got a bit of squeeze out on the outsides and none on the insides. Outside we can come back and clean up after the fact, but the inside you really can't. So that completes our rHop window, or our rHop installation. I'll have sort of part 2 of this after this dries, and showing flat hopping, your bucking, and sort of the setup going into your hop-up chamber. This one's going to be a bit weird because, like I said, it's an M249 A&K, and its hop-up chamber's kind of derp, but that is Sherlock's method of cutting windows, where you can get repeatable. You can make as many windows, making as many rHop patches for a given barrel as you want. Apologize for the length of this video. I hope it was worth a watch, and maybe there's a trick or two that you picked up that you can use. Any questions? Probably best place to hit me up is on the airsoft subreddit. I hope you enjoyed, and I may make a few more videos. Bye.